Frankenstein's Aunt by Rune Pettersson. Monster's First Day. The spring sun shone down on the gray walls of the castle. Deep in the shadows of the tangle of briars, a huge figure was wrestling among the thorns. His movements were stiff and uncertain, and a dull, dissatisfied growling came from his throat. Now and again he raised his hands and covered his face with fumbling, helpless gestures to protect it from the sun. And when he did that, the black sleeves of his outgrown jacket slid back, revealing the great stitches in his wrists. His eyes were half closed, his mouth was half open, his hair hung down from his flat skull like grass over the edge of a cliff. The cathode and anode glinted in his neck in the spring sunlight. He grasped the bushes again with his great hands and heaved and hauled, pricking himself in the thorns and whimpering like a puppy. "How are things going, Frankie?" Aunt Frankenstein came out of the kitchen door and was standing beside him. Although she was considered a large lady at 6 feet 2 inches in her socks, she hardly reached his shoulder. Monster looked down at her through lowered eyelids, fumbling with his hands in helpless gestures that became even more helpless in that jacket, and groaned miserably. "I think I understand," said Hannah Frankenstein. "You think it's hard work, don't you? Well, perhaps it is a bit much, putting you to cleaning this jungle all at once. You must be a bit weak after lying in a coma for so long." She took her cigar case out of her jacket pocket, fished out a large dark brown Brazilian cigar, and put it in her mouth. Monster struggled to fix his weary yellow eyes on her, and a glimmer of interest appeared in the flickering pupils. "Yes, keep on looking," said Aunt Frankenstein. "Can you say cigar?" The monster's mouth twitched, and he put his large flat head slightly to one side. On one side, the cathode glinted, or maybe it was the anode. "Ah," he said, and both his black tongue and his voice resembling a parrot's. "Say it again," said Aunt Frankenstein. "Cigar." The monster repeated it. "Cigar." A grin of happiness twisted the corners of his mouth upward. "There, you see," said Aunt Frankenstein. "You can say it. You used to be able to say whole sentences, so you'll have to start getting into training again." The monster repeated the word again, smiling happily, but suddenly his face went rigid with terror. He growled and took a stumbling step backward, raising his hands to protect himself. Aunt Frankenstein had struck a match. "Of course, dash it," she said. "You're afraid of fire, aren't you?" Quickly, she blew out the match. There. It's all right. I'll smoke later." She put the matches back into her pocket again. Monster took a step forward, fumbling miserably with his hands again. "Cigar," he said hesitantly, trying to make contact. He took another stiff step forward and came out into an open glade in the undergrowth. The sun fell on his flat head and straight into his light, shy eyes. He growled angrily and struck out at the sun. There was something touchingly helpless about this colossal figure, still only 1 day old in his new life, and Aunt Frankenstein thought perhaps even a monster should have his period of infancy. "Listen, my friend," she said. "I'm sure you need a spell of convalescence before we can put you to work. I realize that now. You can take it easy for a few days." She bent down and picked a harebell she had seen in among the dead leaves. She gave it to the monster and said, "Perhaps you could go and see if you can find any more of these for me." The monster looked at the harebell. It seemed minutely small in his giant yellow fingers. "Cigar," he said hesitantly, looking at Aunt Frankenstein. "No, that's not a cigar," she said. "It's a harebell. Go and look for harebells now, and I'll go see if I can do something about the sunlight for you. I think I saw an old straw hat in the tool shed." She made her way through the undergrowth, sucking on her unlit cigar. Monster looked at the flower, holding it right up to his eyes. "Harebell," he said, smiling broadly. A few miles away, an observation patrol was on its way up the hill. And that's the end of that chapter.